Hi, I'm Geoffroy Lesur, and I'm going to talk about self-sustaining cycles in the net flux MRI turbulence. So I did this work in the University of Cambridge with Gordon Ogilvy. So first, let me explain why we should take care of zero mean field Shearing boxes. Of course, we know that the classical magnetorotational instability is found when you put a vertical field, a mean vertical field in your box. This is the first calculation of Balbus and Orley in 1991. There are two questions in this case. First, what is the origin of the magnetic field? And second, what are these channel flow solutions you get in Shearing boxes? So this is an example of such a channel flow effect. So you see here a time history of the magnetic turbulent energy, and you see some very strong bursts, which are due to a 2D mode known as the channel flow, which is actually the most unstable mode you have in the Shearing box. This channel flow seems to be modified when you modify the aspect ratio of your system, and clearly it can be a side effect of the Shearing box boundary conditions. So let me show you what channel flow solution looks like. This is a Shearing box. This is a 3D plot of the radial velocity. You see a big 2D mode. This 2D mode becomes unstable, and you get, in the end, 3D developed turbulence. Of course, at some later time, you'll find this channel flow solution again, and it will still go and get destroyed. So this is, here you can see it again, and you get stronger turbulence, and then it's destroyed. So to find another way to understand how turbulence can work in a question disk, it's a good idea to see what's happening when you don't have any mean field, which is Shearing boxes without any net flux. In this case, clearly you don't have any linear theory to explain why you get turbulence in these cases. Basically, when you have a mean field, you know that you have an instability which drives the turbulence. When you don't have any mean field, you don't have a linear theory to explain turbulence. So the first question is, of course, how turbulence is maintained. As said Steve earlier, you can think of a dynamo action, which means that you generate the magnetic field by some kind of kinetic field, which is actually due to the magnetorotational instability. There is also an issue with the magnetic Prandtl number, as said earlier. So we know that if you have a too small magnetic Prandtl number, you will kill the turbulence in these cases. So this is a plot of the magnetic Prandtl number as a function of the Reynolds number. A yes meaning that you have turbulence, no meaning you have nothing. This is a plot from et al. In 2007. And more generally, the question is the process sustaining your turbulence a small or large-scale mechanism? So basically, you would expect this kind of mechanism. You start with a magnetic field. You have a kind of magnetorotational instability, which generates a velocity field. And this velocity field, in turn, excites the magnetic field by some kind of dynamo process. And the idea is, what is this mechanism? So there have been some studies of this kind of mechanism, and the idea is that it has to be a nonlinear mechanism. So the kind of first model in which we can find a nonlinear solution is the solution of Rincon et al., which is a nonlinear steady solution found in plane quade flows. So these plane quade flows are a bit different compared to Shearing boxes. Mainly, they have perfectly conducting walls in the radial direction. So this is an example of such a solution. So you see on the first plot here, the plot of the vertical component of the magnetic field in the phi r plane. Oh no, phi is here and r is here. And you see quite clearly that you have a non-axisymmetric structure in this solution. So the first ingredient to find here is you need, of course, a non-axisymmetric structure because it's a kind of dynamo process. The second plot here shows you the magnetic field itself in the ZR plane. The colors correspond to the azimuthal field and the arrows to the poloidal field. what you can see quite clearly in this plot is that you have a large-scale structure for B phi. You have a quite nice oscillation in the vertical direction here, with more or less no structure in the radial direction, at least for B phi. So the second ingredient seems to be a large-scale B phi of Z, as we see in this steady solution. Unfortunately, when you have a shearing box, you can't find any steady solution. So I wanted to understand how we can understand this picture in a classical shearing box. To do that, I just want to talk a little about the equations. So this is the equations. This is the kind of shearing box we are using. So it's a local model of an equation disk. In my case, I use the incompressible approximation, which means that I don't have any sound wave, I don't have any density waves. And if you're interested in density waves and sound waves, you should take a look at the poster of Tobias Heinemann, talking about the generation of density waves in MRI turbulence simulation. There is, of course, a physical viscosity and ohmic resistivity. So you quantify them using the Reynolds number and magnetic Prandtl number. Numerically, I use a 3D spectral Fourier code, which uses a WeMap method. So it kind of solves all these issues due to the mean shear. And it uses an MPI parallelization based on the FFTW routine. So as I was saying earlier, we are looking for a large-scale field in zero-net flux simulation. And actually, we can find a large-scale field. If you look at B phi in a zero-net flux simulation, you get this kind of snapshot. So this is a snapshot from a nonlinear simulation. This is B phi, and you see that you have a nice oscillation in the vertical direction. It's quite clear, I think, on this snapshot. And you can now take a look at the largest vertical mode you have in the system. So it's B phi, a B phi with just one oscillation in the vertical direction. So we just try to compute the amplitude and the phase of this large-scale mode in a simulation. And this is what you get. This is the amplitude of this large-scale mode. This is a phase of this large-scale mode. And you see that this mode is created. It stays a while, and then it gets destroyed. And you get the cycles here, which have a typical period of about 50 shear time, which is of the order of 5 orbits. So it's quite long if you compare to the typical turbulent time scales. If you now take a look at the phase, you see that the phase is roughly constant during one cycle, which means that the turbulence is creating a large-scale field. This large-scale field just stays here, and then it gets destroyed. It gets destroyed in the end.
You're confident there's no initial condition?
There is no initial condition. This is after 200 orbits. And
but have you tried it with other initial conditions?
yeah, I've modified the initial conditions.
Boundary conditions, this 100 shear times, what's the size of the box is about 100?
Oh, no, it's about 1. So, I mean, you have plenty of shear time here.
Does that change if you change the resolution?
Oh, no. And you actually, you have the resistivity and viscosity is quite large, so you have no energy in the smallest mode. It's 64 and 100 mode in the azimuthal direction. But I will show that later. This is...
Sorry, how are you handling the radial shearing down condition with Fourier?
That's an interesting question, but it's kind of not very simple. So if you want, I will explain that to you later. But the basic idea is that you work in a sheared frame. And in this sheared frame, you are periodic. So then you can Fourier transform, and you have to use a WeMap to get back to the classical frame of the shearing sheet boundary conditions.
You WeMap every time step, or just occasionally when it becomes?
The WeMap is done roughly every shear time. And we have checked that the period you see here is actually not related to this WeMap procedure. Sorry?
Have you modified this cost density to see how this behaves?
Yes, actually, yeah. In this particular simulation, the Reynolds number is changed at every 200 or 300 shear time. And you can see that it's always here, whatever is the Reynolds number. It's not plotted in this simulation, but we have changed the Reynolds number in simulations. And you see that for Reynolds number high and low, down to the marginal stability, actually. If you now take a look at the transport coefficient, you can't see the cycles. It's quite clear here. You have the cycles. You have nothing in the transport coefficient, which kind of explains why it has not been noticed earlier. Yes, but it's clearly not the same configuration. Well, there are cycles, but in the case of Brandenburg et al., it was with different vertical boundary conditions, with vertical stratification, and they allow for the apparition of a mean field, which is not the case here.
But they did see also an azimuthal structure developing and oscillating on the long time scale.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And I think we have to see the end of the talk just to really judge this. It's true that it was.
I'm not saying, I mean, in the case of zero mean flux showing boxes, I think it's the first time we see a kind of long timescale cycle. Okay. So let's take a look at one cycle. This is B phi doing a simulation with these parameters. So you see that in the beginning you had more or less no structure. This large-scale structure builds up, as you can see here. Now it's quite obvious that you have a vertical oscillation of B phi, and in the end, this large-scale B phi gets destroyed by some non-axisymmetric structures. So here you get some chaotic behavior, and you destroy your structure. Yes. So let's see what's happening during one cycle. I want to take a look at the induction equation and see the budget of this large-scale B phi. So this is the budget for the largest vertical mode you have in the system. For B phi, you have basically three terms. The shear term, you have a term due to the EMF and a resistive term. For the radial field, you have only two terms, EMF and resistive effect. Of course, you have non-linearities hidden in this system, which are actually in the EMF. And these EMFs, of course, involve a coupling between various other modes, which can be non-axisymmetric. So this is what is the evolution of each of these terms in one simulation. So this plot here corresponds to this equation here. The blue curve corresponds to the evolution of B phi, so you have one cycle. The green line here corresponds to the shear term. When the shear term is positive, it means that you are creating some large-scale B phi. So in the beginning, you are creating some B phi, and this is why the B phi is growing. And at later time, this term gets reversed, which means that you are destroying some B phi. If you take a look at the EMF term, so this term here, it's the red line here, and you see that this term is always negative, meaning that this ER term is actually a turbulent resistivity in this problem. If you now take a look at the radial component of the induction equation, you get this kind of plot. So this is BR in blue line, and the green line corresponds to this EMF term. And you see that the oscillation is primarily due to the EMF term here. So what we can conclude just from this very basic analysis is that this EMF term is resistive, more or less, and the oscillation, so let's say the dynamo process, the feedback, is due to E phi in the end. Now, of course, you may wonder what is the origin of this EMF, this E phi here. So, of course, it can involve some non-axisymmetric waves, and it does. So this is, once again, E phi, the evolution of E phi in one simulation. And this is the contribution to this E phi from various non-axisymmetric waves. The blue line corresponds to axisymmetric contribution to E phi. You see that this contribution is very small. If you now take a look at the largest non-axisymmetric waves, you see that this is a green line, and you see that these modes actually contribute the most to the EMF in the end. And what we can deduce from that is that these EMFs actually comes from the largest non-axisymmetric waves of your system. And you get actually the same result for the radial field. So basically, we know that we have a kind of, let's say, alpha omega dynamo, and the electromotive forces comes from non-axisymmetric waves, but the largest ones. So now let's see if we can understand that in terms of a linear analysis. So let's consider the linear response to a non-homogeneous field of this kind. So I just put a b phi, which is a function of z, with a very simple function, it's a cosine. And on the top of that, I put some non-axisymmetric waves, which have the largest azimuthal wave number. So this is a classical picture for non-axisymmetric waves. And then I want to deduce from these waves the axisymmetric EMF. So I just couple U and B from one wave, and I get an EMF profile which is axisymmetric. So I want to know how this field, this EMF created by my linear Shearing waves, how this field gets correlated to the field I have imposed in the beginning. So I want to compute this correlation coefficient. So let's remember the induction equation here. I want to understand how this term is correlated to the imposed field and how this term is correlated to the imposed field. So I compute this gamma phi and gamma r. This gamma phi tells you that if gamma phi is positive, you are creating some b phi from the Shearing waves. If gamma phi is negative, you are destroying some b phi from this term here. And the same thing for gamma r. So you can do that numerically. So it's a linear analysis, but it's not very simple. So you can do that numerically. And you can even do it analytically, but I won't go into the details. So this is a result from a linear computation involving very different Shearing waves. The first line is gamma phi, and I have varied the large scale field amplitude. And you see that gamma phi is always negative, whatever is the large scale field amplitude, which means that the Shearing waves has always a resistive effect, as we have seen in numerical simulation. So first thing, this linear analysis tells you that you will have a resistive effect on b phi.
So now you're including cross terms?
Yes, so it's actually a quadratic quantity. Yes, yes. It's a second order correlation, but it's axisymmetric. Because you couple two non-axisymmetric waves with the same azimuthal wave number. So you get an
All of these waves have the same azimuthal wave number?
Well, the waves themselves are non-axisymmetric, but the EMF, which is deduced from them, is axisymmetric.
Yeah, but the question is, you say you have a random set of Shearing waves.
Yeah.
You're putting in waves one at a time? Or
Yes.
you put in a linear
No, you put them one at a time, and you just want to see what is the effect of one Shearing wave. For the radial component, you see a different effect. You see that for weak field, so there's two cases here, this coefficient is positive, and it gets reversed as you get to stronger field. So you see that the feedback actually depends on the strength of the field you have imposed in the beginning. And it's actually why you get cycles in the end of the day. So let's summarize that with a very simple toy model. So these are the induction equation for the axisymmetric field. For B phi, I've just assumed a turbulent resistivity prescription. And for the radial component, I have assumed a kind of back reaction which gets reversed for a field strength for B phi of the order of 0.1, which is consistent with my linear analysis. So you can just compute how the field evolves with this kind of system, and you get cycles. You get cycles with the white period, with typically the white values for each of the terms of the equation. And all you need is gamma of the order of beta of the order of the alpha coefficient of Shearing and Sonyaev. So it means that you can get a kind of self-consistent model just assuming that the turbulence has an efficiency of the order of alpha. So we have now some clues about how we can sustain a magnetic field in zero net flux shearing boxes. So let's start with this axisymmetric B phi, which is very strong. This axisymmetric B phi amplifies the shearing waves using a kind of magnetorotational instability. The shearing waves amplified in turns gives a response, which is a turbulent resistivity on B phi and a dynamo effect on the radial field. And of course, you close the loop with the mean shear. So this is quite similar to an alpha omega dynamo, except that this term is not an alpha term. It's more a kind of resistive term. Of course, you have to close the loop on the other side because these shearing waves will be damped in the end. Of course, they are shearing waves. So you can assume that they couple together and they give a turbulent cascade. And this turbulent cascade, in turn, excites some new shearing waves so that you always generate non-axisymmetric structure in your system. This loop here is not included in this model. So to conclude, I would say that this magnetorotational instability naturally provide a dynamo feedback provided that you have a non-homogeneous field in your system. This feedback is, of course, a non-linear dynamo because you need a non-zero Lorentz force in the system. It's also explained the existence of a large-scale cycle. And what is interesting here is that this cycle doesn't depend on the non-ideal MHD processes. It works at large scale, and it can work for arbitrarily large Reynolds and magnetic Reynolds numbers. Last thing is that this dynamo feedback is not an alpha effect. If you take a look more carefully at the equations, you'll see that it's actually an anisotropic resistivity. Of course, you have shear in the system, you have rotation, so you would expect the turbulent resistivity to be anisotropic. And this is actually the case, and it explains this feedback. However, there is no precise understanding of how you can create this non-axisymmetric structure. We don't understand how the Prandtl number can enter this problem. Of course, we know that it's important in the end, but it doesn't enter this mechanism here. And last thing is that we don't really know, and honestly, I don't think this mechanism is also responsible for the turbulent transport you have in disk. So maybe there is something else to find, of course, here. Okay, thank you.
Trying to connect what this talk with the previous one.
Yep.
Maybe I'm just stressing the third bullet here, but so the previous speaker said that the turbulence was able to sustain itself, or alpha, its independent resolution in the presence of a non-zero mean Vy.
Yep.
You have it, at least at a given altitude, persistent, not mean Vy. But alpha doesn't seem to depend on the phase of the cycle in the azimuthal field.
Yes. Yes.
So this large-scale mean field is very interesting, but it's not doing us any good as far as...
Well, the question is, if you just assume that you have a mean By, the question is, how do you generate this mean By in the beginning?
That's one question. The other question is,
That's
how carefully have you checked that alpha is really independent of the strength of the By that's been produced?
well, we have not found any correlation between the fluctuations of alpha and the cycle itself. And actually, if you just compute what is the alpha due to the B phi, the large scale B phi and BR, which are created by this cycle, you will see that it's fairly small.
I didn't quite mean that. I didn't mean the direct stresses exerted by this large-scale By, but if I understand what the previous speaker was saying, the existence of a non-zero By
Yes.
helped trigger the turbulence. So the stress is actually dominated by the turbulent motion. It's not by the large-scale field.
Yes. Yes.
It's sustained because of the large-scale.
Yes, yes, that's the idea. That's why I don't think that this mechanism itself is responsible for the turbulent transport. But still, you need, as you said, you need this large-scale field.
Do you have somewhere a plot of By as a function of time and alpha as a function of velocity?
Yes, I have all the plots, but not here. Yeah, sure.
Early on, you talked about a slide showing stress.
Oh, you want? Okay. So you see that when the field, the large-scale field is stronger, I mean in mean or over many periods, you'll see that the transport is also stronger. But you can't find the cycles you have here. It does not. Alpha, this alpha coefficient and this large-scale B5. No, well, you don't see, come on, you don't see the cycles here. You see some large-scale features, but
This is going to be processed through turbulence, right? I mean,
yes.
You're going to make Dy that's going to create turbulence. You don't expect alpha exactly to follow.
Yeah.
This stuff, right? So, but it's clearly they know about each other. It seems difficult that the amplitude is not correlated to alpha. I mean,
Well, the amplitude is correlated, but I'm talking about the cycles. Yes, the cycles. So the fact that this guy is very small here and very strong here, you don't see that here, right? You see that the Worth amplitude, I mean the shape of this curve is the same here. I agree with that. But I'm saying that the cycles are not found here.
well, but that's because your tips are very narrow, right? So turbulence doesn't have time to adjust to these tips.
Well, no, and it's a wall plot, so when the mean field goes through zero, you get a spike down to minus infinity.
Yes.
Whereas all that's required to prevent that on the right is that there be some persistent alpha because of it.
Yes, yes. Yes, but
You
what?
really need to do a more quantitative analysis to see the extent to which
Mhm.
those
Yeah.
two are related.
Yeah.
Maybe last question for Maxwell.
Wouldn't you expect a very clear signal of what you're proposing if you actually plotted the toroidal magnetic field average
Yes.
over the toroidal direction and the radial direction as a function of time and height, z?
Yes.
Would you
That's
not then
that's
expect a very clear signal which is
that
clearer than
that that has been done.
and how does it look like?
It's in the preprint of the paper.
You see a clear signal there.
You,
Then I think we need to clarify whether it has really been seen by other people or not. Because you were saying it has been overlooked by other people. It may not.
okay, let's see. Yes? So you see that you have some patches. And these patches get more or less reversed here. And this is, I don't see anything here. Okay. So this is the amplitude, phase, and transport for exactly the same simulation here.
So in that connection with Dr. Vishniak and myself proposed that it might be an incoherent alpha shear dynamo effect.
Yes. Okay, I don't know.